Hola chicos, vamos a continuar con nuestro estudio de los verbos irregulares en el pretérito. Nosotros ya hablamos de los verbos dar, ver, hacer en el primer screencast y luego en el segundo screencast nosotros hablamos de los verbos ir y ser, el segundo screencast. Si tienes preguntas, si no sabes algo de estos dos screencasts, I highly recommend that you go back and you watch them, because today we're going to continue. Oops, I put se and I meant ser down there. Bien, vamos a seguir con los verbos de hoy. Hoy tenemos 4 verbos más, 4 nuevos verbos. At least one of these verbs is one that you may not know, and we'll start with that one. Estos verbos irregulares, we're going to categorize them, and we're going to call them U verbs, because they have that U thing in common. So the first U verb that we're going to see is the verb caber. And the verb caber, if you remember, we've seen it before. I don't think we spent a whole bunch of time with it. Means to fit. So it's something like, my suitcase didn't fit into the trunk. It's not to fit as in clothes. It has nothing to do with clothes. It's fitting something, an object, into something else. So don't think of it in terms of clothing. Okay, so ¿qué pasa con este verbo? We know that with the preterite tense, we've seen our irregular endings. So if we keep in mind, if we always remember what our irregular endings are, iste, o, imos, istes, ieron, we always remember that these are the endings that we're going to use for any irregular verb besides the first few that we saw, the verbs dar and ver and ir and ser, which are a little bit different. All of these verbs, the 4 verbs we're about to talk about, are all going to use these endings here. So what's the U all about? What happens with these verbs? Well, the problem with these verbs is they don't only have different endings, but they also have different roots of the verb. So we talk about the root of the verb. Here's the root, the CAB, everything before the ER. And in the preterite tense, this changes. So what is the root going to be with this verb? The root changes to coup, C-U-P, hence the U, why we call them U verbs. Okay? And what happens with this verb is now we have this root and we add these endings, these irregular endings, onto this for our conjugations. So instead of, for example, cabe, we now have for the yo form of the verb coupe. And let's just conjugate it all the way down. Coupe, cupiste, cupo, cupimos, cupistes, and finally, cupieron. So, la cosa más difícil de este verbo, sort of the hardest thing to remember, is this stem. You have to remember that the stem changes. This is key, understanding that caber in the preterite tense has that irregular root to it. And our irregular endings, we know them, we should know them, so every verb is going to do that. So the verb caber is the first one. ¿Qué es el segundo verbo? El segundo verbo irregular es el verbo poner. A verb that we know, a verb that we use very commonly. Poner means to put. A little trick, people confuse this often with the verb poder. If you look at this on in here, it helps to put on. You can sort of remember it that way. So poner is to put. So what happens with this verb? This verb also has an irregular root. But it's not only the O and the changes, it's the N as well. This root is totally different. The root here is pus, right? It's got this US in here, and you can laugh because it's kind of a funny word, and then we get over it and we move on. But that's the root of the verb. You're not saying anything weird, especially when you say the yo form, which is going to look a little strange to you in a second. We use our irregular endings, which we know at this point, and we attach them on to this root. So the yo form, like I said, is going to sound a little funny. The yo form for I put is yo puse. The to form, pusiste, ele usted puso, and you can probably do the rest from here. Think about what it would be. Pusimos, pusistes, pusieron, right? Because we use our same endings that we just saw on the previous slide. So, for example, he put the dinner on the table. Él puso la cena en la mesa. We put the homework on the desk. Nosotros pusimos la tarea en el escritorio. This is how we use this verb. Once again, we have our same endings that we saw with the other verb, with the verb caber, but the root is going to be different. All right. Otro verbo. El próximo verbo. Let's do another one on this slide here. We have the room. The next verb is, you may have guessed it, the verb, oops, I'll do it up top, sorry, is the verb poder. Now we know poder as meaning to be able to. Or, we know it as can as well, like I can do something. This verb is not as bad as the verb poner. It's just the U just changes. So the O just changes to a U. So the stem is pud. And we see this here as the irregularity. What happens with this verb when we conjugate it down? You guys should really be able to do this. If you take your root here and you add these endings on, the same endings that are underlined in black over here, you'll be able to figure that out. So why don't you pause it right now and conjugate these all the way down in your screencast notebooks. I'm going to continue, but you pause and get those in there, and I'll check them next class. All right, so you've paused it, you've done that. We're going on to the next verb. El próximo verbo es el verbo saber. Right? And the verb saber is an interesting one that we need to actually talk a little bit about. We know saber as meaning to know. In the present tense, when you say yo sé la respuesta, means I know the answer. He knows how to dance. Él sabe bailar. So this is a verb that's pretty straightforward in the present tense. In the preterite tense, it's going to take on a little bit of a different meaning. Its root is going to also be strange. It's going to be soup. And in the preterite tense, which I'll do in blue, in the preterite, this verb means to find out. It changes its meaning. So you don't use this verb in the preterite tense for to know. You use it for to find out. Okay? Let's take a second and let's think about how this verb would be conjugated. So why don't you guys take a second to do all the conjugations in your screencast notebook. All right, looking at the endings from the other. We know that the endings are e, iste, o, imos, istes, ieron. So go ahead and pause it and do that. Okay, so now you've conjugated your verbs with the verb saber. You have it down. I'll check and take a look at it tomorrow, make sure it's good. Going back to what this verb means, let me give you a couple examples. This is sort of the typical way to use this verb in the preterite tense. Yo supe la verdad. La verdad means the truth. And so in this case, you're saying, I found out the truth. This verb does not mean to know. Okay? So how would you say, then, I knew the answer? What's the other way we can express the past in Spanish? Well, we can use the imperfect. So whenever you want to use this verb for to know, you need to use the imperfect tense. In this case, yo sabía la respuesta. I knew the answer. Contrast that with yo sé la respuesta, meaning I know the answer. This is a great example of how in 3 different tenses we have the preterite here in this example, the imperfect here in this example, and the present here in this example. This is an example of how these verbs can really change. This means found out, this means knew, and this means know. So all this stuff, super useful, all these verbs. Okay. Muy bien, vamos a parar aquí. We'll work with these verbs in class next time. I will be checking your screencast notebooks next time as well, so be sure that you have everything done, including these conjugations that I didn't give you guys, just as a little practice. Okay, gracias por su atención. Nos vemos en clase. Chao.